Sometimes the end of your world comes in champagne bubbles and camera flashes. It doesn't scream. It whispers softly, beautifully, right before everything collapses. That night, the ballroom at the Greenwich Grand shimmered with chandeliers, laughter, and lies wrapped in velvet. I'd spent years curating that world, the dresses, the dinners, the illusion of forever. But illusions, I learned, don't break. They dissolve. And in their place, you find what's real, the pain, the silence, the woman you were before you became someone's ornament. He didn't just leave me that night. He freed me. Though I wouldn't understand that until much later. The Gala was the event of the season, a fundraiser for an art foundation Ethan and I had co-chaired for years. We'd arrived arm in arm, polished perfection, the kind people looked at and whispered, goals. He wore confidence like a tailored suit. I wore composure. Both fit a little too tightly. Halfway through the evening, I noticed it, the way his attention lingered one table too long, the laughter that wasn't mine, the subtle distance that always precedes truth. Her name was Victoria Hale, sharp, stunning, a woman whose money could buy silence and spotlight in equal measure. I didn't need an introduction. The look between them said enough. When the host called us to the stage for the final toast, I stood beside him, smiling for the cameras as his words cut like glass. Marriage, he said, raising his glass, is about partnership, knowing when to let someone else take the lead. He didn't look at me when he said it. He looked at her. Applause. Flashbulbs. 1,000 polite hands clapping for a love that no longer existed. I held my smile until the last photo was taken. Then I walked off the stage, through the corridor lined with roses and laughter, and into the cold night. Outside, the sound of violins bled softly through the walls. I could still hear his voice echoing behind me, smooth and certain, a man celebrating his next chapter before I'd even closed mine. The car waited at the curb. The driver opened the door, but I shook my head. Not tonight, I said, my voice calm, even. I walked instead. Past the glittering windows, past the people who thought wealth could hide truth. Every step away from that ballroom felt like a page tearing from a story I'd outgrown. By the time I reached the corner, my phone buzzed. A message. We should talk tomorrow. Please don't make a scene tonight. I stared at the screen for a long moment before deleting the message. No reply. No scene. Just silence, the kind that doesn't wound anymore, only clears space for something new. That night, I packed 2 bags. Not because I knew what came next, but because I knew what couldn't come again. The morning light broke through the windows as if it had been waiting for me to finally see it. For the first time in years, the air felt clean. And though I didn't know it then, that was the morning Ethan Hale would wake to find the wife he underestimated gone, and the woman who would rebuild her own world just beginning to rise. Morning came with headlines instead of sunlight. Greenwich power couple split at Gala. The words blinked from every newsfeed like a wound dressed in glitter. I sat at my kitchen counter, still in the silk blouse I'd worn under my gown. Coffee steamed in my hand untouched. The phone rang, friends, reporters, publicists. I let it all go to voicemail. What was there to say? That the life they envied had never really existed? When the doorbell finally rang, it wasn't Ethan. It was Claire, my oldest friend, holding a paper bag of croissants, and the kind of look only real friends give, the one that says, I'm not here for gossip, I'm here for you. She set the bag down. I saw the news. I'm fine, I lied. You're not, she said gently. But you will be. We sat on the floor like we used to in college, legs crossed, coffee between us. For the first time in years, I laughed, sharp, unpolished, real. The sound felt like breathing. By afternoon, I'd turned off every device and opened my laptop for something else. A blank document. The cursor blinked, patient. I typed one line, start again from truth. For years, I'd managed other people's charities, designed events, built atmospheres that made others look powerful. I knew how influence moved, where it started, how it grew. What if I used that knowledge for something that was mine? The thought didn't feel like revenge. It felt like clarity. Maybe my new beginning didn't need to shout. Maybe it could build quietly, foundation first, pride later. Claire called from the kitchen. What are you thinking? I looked at the screen. That I'm not done. That evening, I packed away the framed photos, the awards that had his name printed above mine. Each one went into a box marked Old Life. The room looked emptier afterward, but lighter too. Before bed, I stepped onto the balcony. The city lights spread below, restless and alive. Somewhere out there, Ethan and Victoria were probably toasting a new headline. But for the first time, I didn't feel replaced. I felt released. The wind was cool against my face. I whispered, "Watch what I build next." Not to him, to myself. And deep down, I knew this wasn't about money or status or proving a point. It was about reclaiming the one thing I'd given away too easily, my own story. For weeks, I lived in a rhythm of silence and small steps. Morning coffee. Walks through downtown Greenwich. Notes scribbled on napkins and receipts. Some women fall apart after betrayal. I started sketching. I'd always had an eye for design, not the kind that screams for attention, but the kind that breathes it in. At every gala, every dinner, I'd noticed how power expressed itself in space, who sat where, how the light hit the glass, how beauty became currency. That was the language I understood better than any apology Ethan ever gave. So I spoke it again. On my own terms. I called Claire one morning. "Remember how I used to design layouts for charity events?" She laughed. "Remember? You ran them. Half the city copied you." I smiled. "Then it's time they pay for the blueprint." That week, Aurelia Concepts was born, named after my grandmother, the first woman I'd ever seen build something out of nothing. No office. No investors. Just a laptop, a phone, and a list of people who once shook my hand for his attention. Now they'd hear from me directly. Most didn't respond. Some did, out of curiosity, maybe guilt. The first contract came from an art gallery I'd once helped fund. Their new director said, "We heard you're taking projects again. We'd love your touch for our autumn showcase." I almost cried. Instead, I said, "You'll have it." That night, I worked until dawn, candles burning down to wax, designs spilling across the floor like scattered light. When the morning came, the sketches felt alive. Honest. Elegant. Mine. Claire dropped by with bagels. "You haven't slept, have you?" "I'm not tired," I said, smiling. "I'm rebuilding." By the time the gallery launch arrived, the town had begun whispering again. But this time, the whispers carried my name. The night of the opening, the hall glowed in soft amber tones. Guests paused, staring, mesmerized by the balance of art and light. A journalist approached. "Who designed this?" "Amelia," the director said proudly. "Aurelia Concepts." The article that followed ran the next morning. "Greenwich's forgotten muse returns, and she's not anyone's plus one anymore." When I read it, I didn't feel pride. I felt peace. The kind that comes when you realize you no longer need to prove what you always were capable of. Later that week, I received a message. "Congratulations. It's beautiful." I stared at it for a long moment, then smiled. Not because I cared about his words, but because, for once, they didn't matter. That evening, I poured a glass of wine and stood by the window, looking out over Greenwich, the same skyline that once made me feel small. Now it looked different. Not as a reminder of what I lost, but as proof of what I could still become. For the first time since the gala, I said the words out loud, "This is just the beginning." And I believed them. Success didn't arrive overnight. It came slowly, like the tide, each project another quiet wave reshaping the shore. By winter, Aurelia Concepts had become a name whispered in Greenwich boardrooms and New York art circles. My designs were described as elegant restraint, spaces that didn't demand attention but commanded it. People started asking, "Who is she working with now?" The answer was simple: herself. Claire called one morning, excitement in her voice. "You've been shortlisted for the Westfield Foundation renovation." I froze. That project was the crown jewel of Greenwich, a $20 million transformation that every firm in the state wanted, including Hale and Partners, Ethan's company. My pulse quickened. "They know who I am?" She laughed. "They know exactly who you are. That's why they want you." The interview was set for Friday. I spent the next 2 days refining every inch of my proposal, every light angle, every line, every note of calm power I'd ever learned from being invisible in rooms like his. When I walked into that conference room, it was déjà vu, the same kind of luxury space where my silence once echoed. Except this time, I wasn't the accessory. I was the presentation. At the head of the table sat the board. And beside them, Ethan. He looked older, sharper, the kind of confidence that had learned humility. "Miss Carter," the chairwoman said warmly, "we've heard a lot about your recent work." I smiled. "Thank you. I'm proud of what we've built." I began the presentation, calm, poised, each slide a statement of purpose rather than persuasion. The project was about restoration, not reinvention, bringing back dignity to a space that once belonged to everyone. When I finished, silence filled the room, not awkward, but thoughtful. Then Ethan spoke, his voice low. "It's perfect." The chairwoman nodded. "Agreed." As I gathered my papers, I caught his eyes. There was no tension, no bitterness, just quiet recognition. We had both changed, but only one of us had evolved. That night, Claire called, practically shouting, "You got it, Amelia. The Westfield project is yours." For a long time, I didn't say a word. I just stood there in the middle of my apartment, surrounded by the stillness that used to feel like loss. Now it sounded like arrival. The next few months were a blur of blueprints, deadlines, and design meetings. Aurelia Concepts tripled in size, hiring new architects and designers, many of them women who'd been overlooked by firms that valued charm over competence. We built not just spaces, we built chances. At the project's ribbon-cutting ceremony, the mayor called me one of Greenwich's most visionary entrepreneurs. Reporters lined up with microphones, flashbulbs blinking like small bursts of redemption. When one asked, "What inspired you to start again after such a public setback?" I smiled. Sometimes endings are just beginnings that forgot their timing. Later, I spotted Ethan across the crowd. He raised a glass, not of arrogance, but respect. I nodded in return, because this wasn't about revenge. It was about recognition of what I'd built and of the woman who finally stood tall enough to see herself clearly. That evening, as the lights from the newly restored hall reflected on the water, I felt something I hadn't felt in years, peace without permission. The city glowed around me. My name shimmered on the project plaque. And for the first time, Greenwich didn't feel like the stage of my heartbreak. It felt like the home of my becoming. Growth has a sound. It isn't applause or money, it's the quiet hum of people who finally believe in what they're building. By spring, Aurelia Concepts had become more than a studio, it was a movement. We designed community spaces, galleries, and even a mentoring program for young women in design. Every wall we built held a story of someone who'd once been overlooked. But success, I learned, tests gentleness as much as grit. One afternoon, Lena, now my lead architect, stood in my doorway, worry in her eyes. "We're overbooked," she said. "2 new clients want contracts by Friday. We don't have the bandwidth." I sighed, scanning the calendar. Every square was full. "Then we say no," I said. Her eyebrows lifted. "You sure? They're big names." "Yes," I said firmly. "The wrong projects cost more than they pay." She smiled faintly. "You've changed, Amelia. Maybe I just finally learned how to choose." That evening I walked through the nearly finished Westfield Hall alone. Sunlight poured through the tall windows, catching dust that shimmered like memory. The space felt alive, warm, human, open. Exactly what I'd wanted for myself once. The next day, a letter arrived, heavy paper, gold trim. An invitation to the Greenwich Legacy Award Gala. The same event where Ethan and I had last stood together years ago. This time, the invitation had only one name, Amelia Carter, founder, Aurelia Concepts. Claire called before I could decide. "You're going, right?" I hesitated. "I don't know if I need that room anymore." She laughed. "Maybe the room needs you." The night of the gala, I wore a black gown, elegant, quiet, mine. When I entered, the cameras flashed again, but the noise didn't sting this time. People turned, not to whisper, but to greet. Halfway through dinner, the host approached the stage. "Tonight," she said, "we honor a woman who rebuilt not from scandal, but from substance. Please welcome Amelia Carter." Applause rose, steady, sincere. I stood, heart calm, and walked to the microphone. Years ago, I stood in this very room and thought my life had ended. What I didn't realize was that it was only ending for the version of me that needed permission to shine. I paused, meeting the eyes of faces that once looked past me. Every person in this room knows what loss feels like. The miracle is not avoiding it, it's creating something honest in its aftermath. The applause that followed wasn't loud. It was kind. The kind that fills you instead of deafening you. When I stepped down, Ethan was there, older, quieter. He smiled. "You found your light." I returned the smile. "No, I built it." Outside, the night air smelled like spring rain. Claire linked her arm through mine. "How does it feel?" "Peaceful," I said. "Like the storm finally taught me something." Across the street, the newly restored Westfield Hall glowed in gold light. My company's name shimmered above its doors. I looked at it and whispered, "This is what grace looks like after fire." And somewhere inside, I knew the story wasn't about what he took. It was about what I chose to create instead. Summer came with the soft hum of construction and conversation. Greenwich had changed. So had I. Aurelia Concepts now stretched beyond the town that birthed it. We had projects in Boston, D.C., and one in Chicago that paired historic restoration with sustainable design. Every flight, every meeting, every new contract felt less like running and more like returning to something I'd always been meant to do. But expansion brings weight. One morning, I sat in my glass-walled office overlooking the harbor, papers stacked high, emails flooding in. Lena knocked gently. "You ever rest?" I smiled. "Rest is overrated." She folded her arms. "Not when you're leading people who watch how you breathe." That stopped me. For years, I'd measured strength by movement. Now, maybe it was time to measure it by stillness. So I started small. Lunch breaks outside. Walking home instead of driving. Saying thank you instead of just do it. The more space I gave my team, the more they filled it with talent, with heart, with ideas I'd never have imagined alone. One afternoon, a young intern named Maya asked to speak with me. She was nervous, clutching a folder. "Miss Carter," she said, "I grew up here. I didn't think women like us could have offices like this." Her voice trembled. "Thank you for proving we can." I looked at her, saw myself 20 years younger, before compromise and doubt. "Don't wait for anyone to hand you permission," I told her. "Build the door yourself." That night, I hosted a dinner at the newly finished Riverside Pavilion, one of our biggest projects. The guest list was filled with city officials, partners, and young designers. It wasn't opulence that filled the room this time. It was connection, people shaking hands across differences, ideas mixing like colors on a palette. During dessert, Lena raised her glass. "To Amelia," she said, "for teaching us that legacy isn't what you leave behind, it's who you lift while you're here." Applause rose, gentle and true. I looked around and realized this was my empire. Not marble and glass, but people. The quiet, determined ones who'd believed in a woman starting over. Later, standing on the terrace, I gazed out at the harbor lights. A message buzzed on my phone, an invitation to speak at a global design summit in London. 3 years ago, I'd have doubted I belonged there. Now, I smiled. "Book the flight," I told Lena. "Let's see how far truth can travel." The breeze off the water was cool, almost tender. I thought of Greenwich, the town that once watched me fall, now reflecting the glow of everything rebuilt. No revenge, no bitterness. Just the kind of calm you earn when the world finally matches the rhythm of your own heart. And for the first time, I understood that the point of rebuilding isn't to rise higher than those who hurt you, it's to rise high enough that their shadow never touches you again. Autumn drifted softly over the city, gold leaves circling through the air like slow applause. 3 years had passed since the night that shattered my old life. Now, standing backstage at the Global Design Summit in London, I felt that familiar stillness before something extraordinary. The hall beyond the curtain buzzed with voices, architects, philanthropists, students from around the world. A woman approached, headset in hand. "Ms. Carter, they're ready for you." I smiled. "So am I." When I stepped onto the stage, light washed across the room. Thousands of faces looked up. I took a breath. This, I said, started with loss. With one evening that took everything I thought defined me. But loss, I've learned, isn't the opposite of life. It's the part that introduces you to yourself. I spoke about design as empathy, about how every line we draw should make space for someone else to belong. I told them that beauty isn't luxury, it's honesty made visible. And when I finished, the room rose in quiet unity, the kind of applause that feels like understanding, not noise. Afterward, reporters clustered, but I slipped away to the balcony overlooking the Thames. London glittered below, alive, restless, familiar. A voice came from behind me. You always did know how to stop a room. Ethan. He looked different, older, humbler, almost gentle. I saw the broadcast, he said. You were remarkable. Thank you, I said simply. He hesitated. I didn't know what I had back then. I met his eyes, not in anger, just clarity. That's the thing about value, it's only visible when you stop looking for ownership. He nodded slowly. You're happy. I'm whole, I corrected. There's a difference. For the first time, he smiled, not out of pride or regret, but peace. I'm glad. Then he walked away, leaving only the sound of the river between us. I stayed on the balcony a long time. Below, London's lights rippled across the water like threads of possibility. When I finally turned to go, my reflection in the glass startled me, not because of who I'd become, but because of how familiar she felt. The woman staring back was the one who'd always been there, waiting for the noise to fade. Back home weeks later, Greenwich greeted me with crisp air and the scent of sea salt. The Aurelia headquarters stood gleaming at the harbor's edge, filled with life. Maya, the intern who once doubted herself, now led a project team. Lena was finalizing plans for our new mentorship program. I watched them all and felt something deeper than pride, continuity. That evening, we held a small gathering in the studio courtyard. No photographers, no press. Just the people who had built this dream with their hands and hearts. As the sun melted into the horizon, I raised my glass. To second chances, I said. Not the ones given to us, but the ones we give ourselves. Laughter. Glasses clinking. The easy music of belonging. When the crowd thinned, I walked to the edge of the dock, heels clicking softly on the wood. The water shimmered with the reflection of our logo, Aurelia, steady and bright. I whispered, we did it. And the wind off the harbor carried the words back to me like a promise kept. No revenge. No bitterness. Only grace. Because in the end, the greatest victory wasn't building an empire that shook Greenwich, it was building a life that no longer needed to.